I'm not a European. I'm an African. If I have to speak in racial terms, I'm a white African. My family came to Africa in 1685. I've got no other home. I've got no other continent. I'm part of Africa. And I've just as much right to be here as anybody else in Africa. I'm not going to allow anyone to push me out. I'm not going to allow anybody to push my family or my people out of Africa. We've got a future here. We're going to stay here.
Hi everyone, I'm Petrus and welcome to WorldView. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you've watched any of our content so far and liked it, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and donating on Patreon. Today we're talking with Corne Mulder. Dr. Corne Mulder has been the Member of Parliament since 1994, which makes him the longest serving Member of Parliament. He is the Vryheids Front Plus Chief Whip and leader of the Western Cape's Freedom Front Plus constituency. The doctor also chairs the party's Policy and Constitutional Committee. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to participate. Thanks a lot.
So I was really looking forward to this because I feel like South Africans has multiple forms of entertainment. You know, I mean, they've got the TV, you know, they've got the Springbokker, they've got so much more that they enjoy. But one of them has to be Parliament. I mean, that is a staple of South African entertainment. And having had so many years at Parliament, you must have had some amazing life experiences and some that might want you, you know, walk away very frustrated. Could you just give us some of the highlights of your long career in the Parliament? You know, what stood out? What was special to you?
Sure, absolutely. Let me just correct one thing. I had the privilege to serve in Parliament 6.5 years prior to 1994. I was elected the first time on the 29th of March 1988. So I served for 6.5 years prior to 1994, and then since 1994 for 27 years. So the total is 33 years. So if I can just remind your viewers that when I got there, I was 29 years old. Mr. P.W. Botha was the president of South Africa. I saw him come and go. I saw EFF And de Klerk taking over, then the democratic election, Mr. Mandela, then Mr. Mbeki, Motlanthe, Jacob Zuma, and now Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's been quite a stint in politics. I've seen a lot and I've experienced a lot. You're absolutely correct. Parliament is a very interesting place. It changed over the years. It is a place to put ideas. It's a platform for ideas where people debate and put their views across. And sometimes you have wonderful humor and you have wonderful opportunities. And sometimes you see the bad also. So there are lots of things in terms of things that we enjoyed in terms of humor, but also sometimes it's a sad place. But you see, Parliament is like politics. Politics is like the ocean. Sometimes it's calm and there are no waves and everything is just calm. And the next moment, it can turn into a vicious storm and things get completely out of control. And you've got to survive in that environment. And I've done so for 33 years.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen some of these examples of where Parliament has acted in amazing ways and good discussions were had that actually changed the course of the way that South Africans live and the way that we talk about things, about situations that are really important. And it helps also a lot for, you know, the younger generation. I was born in 1994, so, you know, you've been all that time in Parliament. I was only born in 1994, and so I've seen the democratic South Africa grow in the ways that we've discussed interesting and important topics. But in some scenarios, I feel like the public generally focuses on some of the more negative things that have happened in Parliament, and that's kind of stuck with them. And one of the things that were actually kind of grey in terms of the way that it was handled in Parliament that I'd like to ask you about was in one of the previous State of the Nation addresses, as is customary for the State of the Nation addresses, that all previous presidents are invited to it. Former President EFF And de Klerk was present in the parliamentary sitting. And then the EFF stood up and made multiple points of order from different individuals within the EFF party and basically told him that he's a murderer and shouldn't be there. I don't know if you remember the specific sitting.
Yes,
you do, yeah. What was your opinion in terms of how the EFF handled it and how South Africans should react to that scenario? Because in some cases, people are like, you know, I'm going to ignore it. Other cases, people are like, okay, this is irritating or serious.
Absolutely. No, people should remember that when the economic freedom fighters came to Parliament the first time, they made it quite clear and they openly said, we're going to bring the revolution to Parliament. In other words, we're not going to be bound by any rules. We're not going to be bound by any conventions. We are just coming here to change everything. And they've done that over the years. They've been acting outside the rules of Parliament. They've been very unruly as well. it's fun and games to a certain extent, to make your point and to be clever in terms of a point of order, but sometimes it does get irritating and it's absolutely unnecessary. Now, that specific incident, I remember it very well, where I'm seated in Parliament. The gallery is right behind me on top, and the former presidents are seated right on the gallery in the front row, right on top where I was seated. So I remember the point very correctly. The EFF tried to make the point. They were taking one after the other point of order, and by doing that, they tried to frustrate the House. So they made the point, and they tried to create a impasse so that the president couldn't address the House and open Parliament, and they were going on about Mr. de Klerk and said that he was a murderer, etc. My training before I went into politics is legal. I'm a trained attorney. I'm a qualified attorney. So I sometimes take those points as well. So I did get up and I took a point of order. And I said, no, they're outside the rules in the first instance. And secondly, they are factually wrong. Mr. de Klerk is not in the gallery because he is a former president that served before 1994 in the old South Africa. He's in the gallery because he was an elected deputy president in the first term between 1994 until 1999. And he was invited as a former deputy president, so he's got all the right to be in the gallery like anybody else, like Thabo Mbeki or anyone else. The point you are making is wrong. But obviously the EFF is not interested in those things. They live on myths, they create myths, and then they try to have those myths become the truth, which is not the case.
And it's very frustrating from the public's perspective, in the sense that there are these very orderly protocols and rules that are followed in the way that things are performed. And you said from your legal background, you understand exactly how these rules of the Parliament works. And you have these situations, and then the EFF kind of very much skirts the boundaries in terms of, okay, one point of order per person. Okay, start going through all of our members. They're trying to exploit this type of system, and we've seen a couple of scenarios where they tried to exploit the system too much to the point where they were thrown out of Parliament. But how do you feel like this is something that, according to a certain track record of revolution, bringing the revolution to the Parliament, should be taken proactively in the future, or is that stopping the discussion?
No, absolutely not. Your viewers should take into consideration that the average lifespan of a member of Parliament, from when you come there until you leave, the average time that you spend in Parliament as a member is approximately 7.5 years. That is how quick the turnover is in Parliament. People come and go. Not many people stay for 10, 20 or 30 years. And the reason for that is that the most important thing in Parliament, if you want to survive, is credibility. Your credibility is at stake, and it depends on how you behave yourself. Does the House take you seriously or not? And that depends on the way that you act in Parliament, the points that you make, how you make it, how you present yourself, how you behave in Parliament. And the problem is that the EFF has said quite obviously they want to bring the revolution and they act outside the rules. But in that process, they've destroyed their own credibility. They are not being taken seriously in Parliament, and they're not being taken seriously outside Parliament, and they're not being taken seriously even by the media at this stage. That's why their support is dwindling at the moment, and they've got problems in that sense. And you can decide. You can play student politics, or you can try to be unruly, but Parliament is a serious place where your credibility is at stake. And if people don't take you serious anymore, for whatever reason, then you are lost, because you can do whatever you like. You might as well resign and go home.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's an extremely valid point, and that's also part of the reason why I know that you've been in Parliament so long, is you've taken this seriously in the way that you address this, and your credibility is very good in that regard. And there are very few other members in Parliament which has the same mentality. So I think, yeah, you've addressed that pretty well. I just want to talk about some of the things they specifically mentioned within their address, their point of order in that specific State of the Nation hearing. So they mentioned that apartheid was a war crime, and the actions that were taken within apartheid in the different scenarios were war crimes and murders in of themselves, unconstitutional criminal acts. So what do you think, or rather, let me phrase this way, do you think it is politically astute to describe apartheid as wrong, but not a war crime?
I'm always amazed at, and we see that in Parliament quite often, that the youngest members who were born after the struggle, when they get to Parliament, try to convince us that they were in the forefront of the struggle. They were in the trenches. They were fighting in Angola and whatever, which are all myths. It's not true. And they try to convince us that they are now the vanguards of the struggle. It's not correct. And then one of those things obviously would be to bring this argument about apartheid, and we can have a long discussion in terms of what does apartheid mean and what does it stand for and what was the implications, what was behind it. But they see that as a ace of spades. It's a trump card. In other words, if I can tag you as being supportive of apartheid or something that have anything to do with apartheid, aha, so you're guilty and you've got nothing further to say, no argument is valid, and I will be talking and you must listen. And that's completely false. It's completely wrong. The whole debate whether apartheid was declared a crime against humanity, there's a huge discussion about that, and there's quite no agreement on that, because a resolution was passed way back then in the National Assembly of the United Nations, the UN Assembly. But when that was brought to the Security Council, it was never passed by the Security Council because some of the Western powers vetoed that whole process. So it's a nice propaganda thing to come and say, well, it was a crime against apartheid. Why? Because the majority of countries felt like that at the time, and now I can take a brush and paint you and whatever, tarnish your image or whatever the case may be. So the second thing would be, if you look at apartheid in terms of that, you'll find that many years, even before 1994, the National Party then moved away from that policy. It was even in the 80s they moved away from that policy. As a matter of fact, the National Party took a decision on the 1st of October 1985, in which the National Party then said South Africa is one united country with one common citizenship and everybody should have the right to vote. So that was already the end of apartheid in that sense. And because of that reality, to try and paint everything now in those terms simply doesn't make sense. Obviously, and there's a difference, and I don't disagree with that. Yes, certain things were done wrongly in those times. Let me just put it in that perspective. The National Party accepted the principle of one South Africa, United South Africa in 1985. But then they tried to control being a minority. You can't do that. You are forced in terms of one person, one vote into a majority government situation. And because they accepted the principle, but they were not prepared to accept the consequences, that's the time when you had the important role played by the security forces. And there's a nice book written by Mr. Coleman in terms of the things that happened during the TRC process, the Truth and Reconciliation process. And you'll find in that report that most of the things, atrocities and things that went wrong in that sense, happened during that process after 85, when they moved away from apartheid or separate development already, but they wanted to cling to power.
So even if one were to take the position that I want to say most, amateur historians would, and the public perception internationally would, that apartheid was wrong and under it certain acts happened that was wrong, if you were to take that position, you wouldn't be able to move that from a public perception to a legal position in terms of making a defense. And if you were to try and make that scenario, would it be fair for me to say that they kind of are crying wolf multiple times, in the sense that they keep using this as an argument, and every time they use this argument to link it to our previous discussion, they lose credibility and they actually tarnish the acts that were performed in apartheid that were wrong. They tarnish the memory of those acts and getting justice for those acts by continuously using this. Because I feel like the public perception, and I'm only talking from my own, small world here, but the perception is that most of our generation have been taught that wrong things happened in apartheid and that should be rectified and in the way that it was performed either or even condoned by certain parties. But now that it's being used as such a defense continuously, people are struggling to find it that has the same weight as it used to. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, but absolutely. But even that is only half of the truth. Very good things happened also in those times, because the impression has been created that everything that happened in the past was bad. No, it's not true. When the ANC came into power in 1994, they inherited the strongest economy in Africa, a country with the strongest economy, with the best infrastructure, with the best electricity grid. Eskom was a top company in the world, with the strongest military, and I can go on. Since then, the ANC destroyed basically all of that. So it's not a question that it was just bad. Good things also happened in those days, and it's quite interesting nowadays that you hear more and more people, black people even, saying some things were better even during those days. So it's not, but obviously your point is correct, that the EFF is trying out and they're jumping on that bandwagon. And the reason for that is the ANC also, when the ANC comes under pressure, they always jump back to that. I've said in Parliament in numerous speeches, the problem with the ANC is, and the EFF as well, is that they go into the future with their backs facing forward because their vision is to the past. And if you do that, you tend to stumble and fall over wheelbarrows, and we see that in terms of their performance.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I want to take one of those points and address the mismanagement of a lot of public sources that have been obtained since apartheid, have been built since apartheid by the current ruling party, which is the ANC. And this has caused a lot of people, especially in the municipal elections, so in different type of scenarios, to then say, okay, we don't want the ANC managing the stuff anymore. We now want a different party to manage it. And they will try to vote municipally in the municipal elections to try and get those parties to manage things. And some actually say that this isn't enough. And this is where we're currently getting to explain to people in a longer analogy what the Cape Independence Movement is. This is what the Cape Independence Movement strives to do. It tries to get the management away from the ANC because of their poor track record nationally, and then give it into the hands of somebody who will hopefully manage it better, which has been the current management of the Western Cape. So the Freedom Front, the Vryheidsfront Plus, or the Freedom Front Plus, vocally supported Cape independence, but you're not the ruling party in the Cape. So why did the Vryheidsfront Plus decide to support this decision? And what is their movement in the future in terms of if Cape were to move towards independence, how you would make yourself part of the solution to the management situation?
Absolutely, very valid question and very topical at the moment. As a matter of fact, some time ago, last year, there was an opinion poll done by a very reputable firm, and they've done a second poll about 3 weeks ago. There will be a press conference on the 12th this week, where they will bring the new results, and I think it's going to be astounding to see what the attitudes in South Africa and the Western Cape is. Absolutely correct. The whole idea of independence, and for the Cape as such, there's a very fundamental underlying logic here. The problem is this. During the negotiations way back in 1993, 1994, a journalist from the United States came and he had an interview with me, and he said, now tell me, how many people in South Africa speak South African? I said, no, there's no such language. He says, but how's that possible? In Germany, people speak German. In South Africa, people must speak South African. I said, no. 11 official languages. We are a very, very diverse society. All the differences that exist in Europe, we've got exactly the same, but we've got more complicating differences in terms of race, in terms of first world, third world, economic development, a lot. We've got all those differences. So South Africa as such is an artificial colonial construct brought together by the colonial power in 1910 with an artificial boundary telling us we are all South Africans. What does it mean? Ask any group of people, do something typically South African. What will they do? Some will braai, some will watch rugby, some will do gumboot dancing, whatever. But there's no common real nation in terms of South Africanism in that sense. Now, we have experienced now the ANC for 27 years. We've seen them misrule for 27 years. What we have in South Africa is not a true democracy. It's a fake democracy. We are quite often being told it's the best constitution in the world. Not true. It's a good constitution. There are good provisions. The problem with the constitution, it's two constitutions in one. You will find all the best international practice points in that constitution, but they're all qualified. This and this and this will be the case, but if you need to redress this and this, you can do that. And all those redress kind of things is exactly creating the problem. So the ANC failed. They failed miserably. They couldn't deliver. They couldn't bring stability. They can't get the economy growing. They are a failed party. Because of that, people tend to say, but why on earth should we be ruled by the ANC? And what kind of democracy is this, where you've got the power to govern just because you are the majority? The test in modern democracies is something completely different. The test in modern democracies in the year 2021 is, what steps do you take to protect the rights of your minorities? How do you look after minorities in your country? It's not only democracy to have a one person, one vote, and then the majority governs, because that is called tyranny of the majority. So to make a long story short, the whole idea of independence, and I've played a pivotal role in my little career. One of the highlights of my career was I had the opportunity way back in 1996 when we wrote the current constitution. I had the opportunity to propose in the Constituent Assembly that wrote the Constitution, Section 235, that deals with self-determination. And we feel very strongly about that. And all the processes at the moment that deals with this idea are all based on Section 235. So from the Freedom Front Plus's point of view in the Western Cape, it's a development at the moment that is running very strongly. To give you an example, we've got an organization here, it's a civic organization called Cape Exit. In March of last year, they had 7,000 signed up members. About a month ago, they now have 820,000 members in the Western Cape. 820,000 members. They've got more members than the ANC received votes in the last election in the Western Cape. The Democratic Alliance received, I think, about 1.2 million votes. This organization's got more than 800,000 members. And if you sign up to become a member, it's not like a Facebook group or something that you just like. You actually complete a membership form. You give your details, your name, your address, your cell phone, your everything. And then you are required to tick 2 boxes. Are you in favor of Cape independence, yes or no? And if a referendum should happen, will you participate in that referendum to vote yes? 820,000 people have signed up for that in the Western Cape. So there's a strong development in that process. And the Freedom Front Plus feels very strongly about that. We support that. And the current government in the Western Cape, the Democratic Alliance, is in a very difficult position. The majority of those 820,000 people voted for the Democratic Alliance in the last election. So if the Democratic Alliance is not going to get on board, the voters will leave them. And I'm obviously busy at the moment to get those people to support the Freedom Front Plus. You've got to vote where your support base would be. If you support the principle of this, absolutely. Why independence? Let me try to conclude with that. Why independence? I am convinced that as a minority, you will not survive in Africa without geographical base under your feet. You will not survive. You cannot survive as a minority at the behest of the majority. We will tolerate you. For example, in the riots we saw in KZN 2 or 3 weeks ago, we are told we've got a wonderful constitution. I didn't see one example when those things happened, where one owner could have go outside and say, whoa, stop, this is the constitution. You're not allowed to do that. The constitution says, I've got rights, I'm protected, go away. It didn't work that way. You will not survive in Africa unless you have a geographical area where you form the majority, where your values are safe, and where you can look after yourselves and take your own decisions. And there are wonderful examples in that. I can go to Rwanda and the genocide that happened there in 1994. It exactly says why it's necessary.
Yeah. And in this scenario, we see a lot of people, having they're seeing the situation in South Africa, in both in management, they're seeing the things in socioeconomic circles, like, for example, the KZN riots, and they're strongly believing that a Cape independence movement is the same. As you've mentioned now, the numbers are quite decisive in the way that this is portrayed. Do you ascribe these type of almost want to say extremely dividing and extreme examples of mismanagement by the ANC as the lead driver for the success that the Freedom Front Plus experienced in the recent election? And of course, we'll briefly talk about this later, but I just want to say this will also lead into an expropriation without compensation discussion for the other provinces.
Yeah, sure. No, definitely it did play a role. People started to realize we have given our support base and the whites in general and other minorities quite naively went into the 1994 dispensation by saying, okay, fine, wonderful. We are going to create this rainbow nation. We are all going to be exactly the same. It will be a non-racial South Africa, and we will all have equal opportunities. And somehow, we are now in a more racist society than even before 1994. Each and everything is based on your race. Can't be acceptable. Absolutely wrong, and that's why it's failing. And then you've got a government that's completely inept, it's completely corrupt, it can't deliver, and people started to say, whoa, stop the bus. Now, every evening, people look at the news, also in the Western Cape, and they see the absolute collapse of infrastructure, the collapse of services, the collapse of local government in the rest of the country. And they say, whoa, we are not going to allow that to happen in the Western Cape. We don't know what we need to do, but we need to do something to prevent us falling and going into that same route. And that's part of the independence thing. And when we saw what happened basically in KZN this time around, people say, no, we are going to do our own thing. And then obviously what happens is some of the critics would say, no, it can't work. Why? The ANC will not allow it. No, it's not true. You can't put your future in the hands of somebody else. It's not for the ANC to decide. They can delay it. They can't prevent it. People must take their own decisions and create the reality, and then the legal implications will follow after that.
Yeah, if I may be so bold, if they're not able to stop riots in KZN, they'll not be able to stop the Cape from succeeding. It's a same scenario, two different groups, but same scenario in terms of the power of the ANC in this scenario, which is
exactly. It's a failing state. They are a failing government and a failing state.
So in this scenario, there's also a question that the reason why the Freedom Front Plus necessarily isn't the opposition party at this point in time, and rather the DA is that DA sometimes, at least in popular perception, represents the more modern, the younger generation's view on things. So they're more of a liberal generation. They have more widely accepting views. They've been more convinced of the Rainbow Nation message from South Africa. Let me put it that way. And there's a lot of sentiment that the Freedom Front Plus, or as I mistakenly continuously saying, the Vryheidsfront Plus, I know we're talking English, but the Vryheidsfront Plus exists to further the Afrikaner identity of self-determination. How do you think that this younger generation and this increasing generation in terms of our population percentage, our demographics in South Africa, how do you feel like this affects the future of the Freedom Front Plus in terms of that divide in identity, the more Afrikaner identity or conservative identity in comparison to the more liberal younger generation?
Sure.
That's more they're becoming more globalized, really.
No, absolutely. The first point I would like to make is that I always put the point and I say that self-determination or the rights of minorities has got nothing to do with liberal or conservative. It's got nothing to do with left or right. As a matter of fact, internationally, organizations and political parties that go for self-determination or minorities that go for their rights, you'll find on the left of the political spectrum. So those are progressive ideas in terms of what real democracy means. Democracy can never mean tyranny of the majority. So in the Freedom Front Plus, as a party, yes, it's correct. When the party was founded in 1994, it started off from an Afrikaner base, and it was a question of Afrikaner nationalism and the whole question about that. But I would say about 6 years ago, the party repositioned itself. We changed our mission statement. We went through a whole process, and the party changed itself and said, no, we recognize where we come from and we still respect that, and it plays an important role. However, we have repositioned ourselves to become a party that looks after the interests and the rights of minorities, all minorities in South Africa. And suddenly we find support across the board from different minorities. In the Western Cape, for example, I've got the most candidates for the local government election will be in the Western Cape on the Freedom Front side. And half of them will be not from the white community. They are colored people. And they are young people, Afrikaans, English speaking, white, brown, doesn't matter. So we are reaching out to other communities and we find support in that because the ideas that we put on the table are those that are in line with best practice international modern things. If I can come to the DA in that sense, yes, the DA actually went for the whole democratic idea of the Rainbow Nation, one beautiful South Africa. But that idea, I think, has died. And the problem with the Democratic Alliance is they still have their eyes on the union buildings. They want to get control of all of South Africa and govern then all the people in South Africa. Good luck, enjoy, and I hope you are very successful. I've got no intention of trying to achieve that. The second thing that plays a very important role, why did people in more numbers vote for the Democratic Alliance? It was not about policy. It was not about liberal ideas or Rainbow Nation. People came out of a system where we had a constituency system, and they feel so bad and so angry about the ANC that they wanted to support the party which they felt had the best chance to defeat the ANC. Let's vote for the biggest party. And it's based on a misnomer. It's a wrong interpretation of the legal system. I predict no single party in South Africa will ever beat the ANC at the polls. What will happen? We've got a proportional system. So the moment when the ANC goes below 50%, there will be a coalition of opposition parties, and the urge to get into power will be so strong that coalition parties, that political parties will form a coalition and govern in terms of a different mandate. And it's going to happen in the local government elections now, later in this year or early February next year. It's going to happen, and it will happen in provincial level, and it will eventually happen on national level. There was a delegation that went to Germany in December 2019 of different parties. I was there, others were there, and we had a look at how the Germans do coalitions, and that is the route that will happen in future.
Okay, so for the Freedom Front Plus, for the Freedom Front Plus specifically, would it be fair then for me to say that one, it's a situation of rebranding the identity and the reputation of the Freedom Front because of the choices that you've made in the constitution, the mission statement change you made 5 years ago, not being even today extremely wide known, and then also the other hand, realizing that people, or getting people to realize that just simply voting for the opposition because you don't want the ADA to win, you want the ANC to lose. That breaking down that mentality will be the future for the Freedom Front Plus.
Absolutely, and the electoral system plays into that. In other words, you can vote for the party that you would like to associate with, even if they are not the biggest party, but you know that your votes will be represented in a coalition government in future. That's what's going to happen, and there was a time when people said, no, but the Freedom Front Plus will lose support. No, we've gained a lot of support. We grew a lot. Just to give you an example, if you take Newlands Rugby Stadium in Cape Town and you fill it up with 50,000 spectators and all of them vote once and they leave, and you fill it up again with another 50,000, you do that 5 times, 250,000. That is the number of people we took away from a Democratic Alliance in the last election. 5 full out Newland stadiums. That's the reality. And since then, in the by-elections indicated that we are not losing them, we are gaining even more. The Democratic Alliance is still coming down and we are still gaining on them, and that's just the reality. And the very large percentage of those are young people.
Yeah, and I mean, this type of trend is what also helps to break down that idea that the DA isn't simply the one you have to vote for the ANC to lose. You should be voting for the Freedom Front Plus, and this is the approach that it's going, and this is why it's growing. My question is you've mentioned previously in this interview that the ANC will try and stop Cape independence, but they won't succeed. There's another fear that people have, and I would like you to address this as fully as possible, saying that there's an argument that's being made currently to postpone the next election, and this is kind of a slippery slope in the scenario that they're trying to find, Jacob Zuma level excuses to postpone the election, and therefore not get into the losing seat, which they're currently heading towards. Is this something that, do you think that they will happen next election? Will this succeed? Will this completely fall flat? Will they not go through with it? What's the scenario around this from your parliamentary view?
No, I hear what you're saying. If you look at the local government elections, in terms of the Constitution, Section 1 that deals with the founding provisions of the Constitution, the founding principles involved, one of them states in Section 1C that we should have regular and free and fair elections as a principle. And then you've got Section 19 in the Bill of Rights that says individuals have the right to vote in regular elections, etc., etc. And then you've got the provision that says there should be elections every 5 years, and then there's a 90-day period that can go beyond that. And that 90-day period in terms of the local government elections takes us to the 3rd of November. And that's why the current date was set for the 27th of October. Then, as we all know, Judge Moseneke was asked to do a report on the whole issue. He came back and he said it can't be free and fair. So now the question is, if he says it can't be free and fair, is there any sense in having a regular election if it's not going to be free and fair? What's the sense of having people elected but it's not free and fair? So now a little bit of a constitutional crisis in that sense. I think what's going to happen is that the Constitutional Court, there's an application, we'll have to see what comes out of it, but I think what's going to happen is that it's going to be postponed. But as Judge Moseneke suggested, not later than the end of February. My prediction is the election will be on the 23rd of February, but I may be wrong. So if that happens, the Constitutional Court will be able to say, no, it's still regular because it's only being moved because of the pandemic, and then it can be free and fair. So that's the one scenario. If you come to national elections and provincial elections, we are bound to have them in 2024 again. And I don't see that the ANC will succeed in postponing or moving away from democracy. In terms of the Constitution, the Constitutional Court, and the citizens won't allow them to do that. If they break the contract and take the people's right away to vote, people will take other steps to protect their own position, their own rights. So I'm not concerned about that. The ANC, there are other ways. The ANC may try to change the electoral system, which is dangerous. Normally, governments that are about to lose power try to change the electoral system to entrench themselves further, and we must try to prevent that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's important for people to keep an eye on, see what bills are being passed, what actions are being taken, then actively use against it, because it's easier to prevent beforehand than it is to try and fight it retroactively, for example. So moving on to one of the other topics that we briefly touched on when talking about the growth of the Freedom Front Plus in the past election was the situation or the question about expropriation without compensation. It's a very hot topic. It's a very topical topic, but we've seen its effect mostly actually in other provinces than the Cape. So, for example, in Limpopo, a lot of the opposition to the majority ANC there actually lost a lot of their votes, and all of those votes went to the Vryheidsfront Plus, which took a very active and very clear stance against this policy, which is affecting a lot of minority communities in those areas. What do you feel, or do you think that the policy as it currently stands is going to pass? Now that it looks like the ANC and the EFF can't agree on anything, they'll not be able to make a coalition to have this pass, so then the other groups will stand against it. Is there any future in this, or is this just a waste of time of Parliament?
Many years ago, there was a television program which was quite nice about a group of guys called the A-Team. And they had a saying, it's neat when a plan comes together. So when it comes to this expropriation thing, I must say it's neat when a plan comes together. I'm serving on that committee. I've been serving there for the last 3 years, trying to prevent exactly expropriation without compensation, because it's a lot of words, but it simply means enable the government to steal other people's property. That's what it means. Nothing more, nothing less.
In layman's terms, that is what it says.
Absolutely. It's confiscation of people's property. Now, the ANC, to do that, needs to amend Section 25 of the Constitution, and to do that, they need a 2/3 majority. They've got only 230 seats in Parliament, and they are short 37 seats to get to a 2/3 majority. They need 267. They don't have that. So the only way that they could get to 267 is they need to get the EFF on board to support their idea, and then they can amend the Constitution. Now, the EFF obviously plays revolution, and they still say, no, we've got a more radical approach even. We want the state to confiscate all property. It should all belong to the state, and then the state will decide you can go and do some farming for 3 years, and then it's up and give it to somebody else. The ANC doesn't believe in that. They want to expropriate certain properties, but they still believe in property rights in terms of the protection of the right of property is only not perhaps my and your right of property. So the problem is this, that the ANC cannot get a 2/3 majority. So they've reached a stalemate in the committee, and there's a nice process behind the scenes that assisted us to get us to that point. So now what the ANC has done, they have adopted certain proposals which are their proposals, and they were not supported by any party in the committee. It was only by the ANC, and the ANC's got a majority, so it's only their support and their ideas. That they published in a bill at the moment, where there can be commentary until the 13th of August, and then they will bring it back to Parliament, and in the committee, the ANC will push that through with their majority in the committee. But then they need to bring that bill as amended to the House, and in the House, they will need a 2/3 majority. Things may change, but as they are at the moment, they won't get a 2/3 majority, and that will mean that Section 25 remains as is. They cannot amend the Constitution, and that will be where we are.
And you don't think there's a scenario where, backhand playing, corruption, or any of those details could constitute getting the EFF to come on board with signing this one as it is in its current format?
It's always possible. You can never trust the EFF. You can never take them by their word. You don't know what they will do. But the problem is, I think the EFF doesn't want to give them a 2/3 majority. Why? It's politically expedient. Why? That they want to go to the electorate and say the reason why you don't have property for free is because the bad ANC doesn't want to confiscate all property. The EFF is prepared to do that. Vote for us next time. We've got the more radical approach. We will confiscate all those white farms and just give it to you. And that's why they are playing a political game in that sense. What the ANC is going to do, if they can't amend the Constitution, which I think will fail, they will come to Parliament with a normal, ordinary law in terms of expropriation law in Parliament, and they will pass that with a 50% majority. And then they will say, well, we're going to do it in terms of the normal law. Then the test will be, but is that law constitutional? Can it survive constitutional muster when it's weighed in terms of Section 25 unamended? So there's going to be some huge battles still, but I think the first one, we have succeeded in preventing them from amending Section 25.
So where are these? So the ANC claims that it's the will of the people, a relatively ambiguous term, admittedly, but it's the will of the people that they want expropriation without compensation. And these people that do have this opinion are theoretically the ones that the EFF specifically want to target and get support from. So my question is, who is this group, and why would they choose between the ANC and the EFF? Or even, does this group exist in the first place?
I think the group that we're talking about is a faction within the ANC. Those are in favor of radical economic transformation. They are pushing this agenda. And it's also based on a myth. The ANC is a very interesting organization. They survive on myths. They create a myth. And if you repeat a number of times a lie, then if nobody challenges that, it becomes the truth. It's a myth. All the opinion polls, all the surveys being done indicates that there is no serious need for land in terms of the vast population that says, I want a piece of land, I want to go farming, I feel like chickens or cow, whatever. It's not true. The majority of South Africans, black, white, all of them, want a job. They want to work. They want to earn a living, to make a living. If you look at the tendency in South Africa, we've got a huge urbanization situation. People are moving and flocking to the cities. It's not a question that people are flocking to the rural areas and they would like to start farming. It's a fallacy. It's a myth. But obviously the ANC uses that and it tries to project, then take the focus away from their failures and blame somebody. It's somebody else's fault that you are poor. You are not poor because you don't have land. You are poor because the economy is not growing. Because the economy is not growing, we are not creating jobs and people are out of jobs. And that are the real issues as far as we are concerned.
So is there any way in which we should be concerned that they could pivot from expropriation without compensation, taking land from people, into forcibly assigning jobs, or perhaps a mismanagement of public funds by getting people to be civil servants with no production or no value to the economic border?
Absolutely. This is Africa and the ANC is in charge. Anything is possible. And that's exactly why I feel so strongly about Cape independence. I just imagine what kind of wonderful country can you create with values, the norms, with the economy that's growing. An absolute jewel in Africa can be created and the potential is there. But if you don't do that, the ANC is capable of anything. They've been in power now for 27 years. They are not voluntarily going to relinquish power. And as their empire is crumbling at the moment, it's becoming a failed state. They're losing control all over. They will grasp at straws. We know that, and we must make provision for that as well.
Okay. So I want to pivot over from this discussion also to one about Zuma's legal case that's currently ongoing. The most recent news is that he was incredibly excited to appear in court and defend his case because the truth was going to come out, and now he's sick again, so he can't attend court. And this type of back and forth in terms of what's theoretically supposed to be our highest legal situation in South Africa, highest legal court dealings in South Africa, has become kind of people don't know what to expect next. It's coming up a bit of a joke in the scenario. So from as a legal expert yourself, what is your opinion on the Zuma legal case, and what can be done? Like, what rules and procedures? I know he's already in jail for the contempt of court, but it doesn't seem like it's stopping him from moving away from the corruption charges that he still faces to this day. Like, what in that case can be done to prevent them from pursuing these Stalinist tactics?
Well, one of the founding provisions of the Constitution in Section 1, entrenched with 75% majority, also refers to the rule of law. And in terms of the rule of law, we are all equal before the law. Also, Mr. Zuma should be equal in the same vein as anybody else. And because of that, he should face the law. Now, as you correctly point out, he was the one that said on many occasions, he can't wait for his day in court, but he doesn't want to go there. And it's quite obvious. He's going to try and do each and everything not to get into court. My first irresponsible reaction would be, but I know it can't be done, I would say go ahead without him, that's fine, but you can't do that. But there has been cases where the seat of the court was moved. And perhaps they should move the seat of court and have the trial in the prison. Make it available in prison. He can be in the corner in his bed and he can listen to what's being said, and they can have it in prison and have the trial right there. And if he can't come to court, let the court go to him. But we cannot allow an individual, for whatever reason, to mismanage the situation and to jeopardize the whole question of legality in South Africa and undermine the rule of law. He must be responsible for the things that was done in his name, and if there are things that he are guilty of, then he should take the responsibility. If he's innocent, let him prove it he's innocent. And obviously, our view is that it should go beyond Mr. Zuma. If you look at all the corruption, all the cases that are still waiting to be prosecuted, let's see where the Zondo Commission goes. But you cannot allow Mr. Zuma to undermine the whole constitutional process, the legal process in this vein. It's quite obvious. He's going for tests, and now it will be another 6 months. We can never accept that.
So at which point should the public say, okay, this is kind of the deadline in terms of what this is acceptable for us to deal with, and then put pressure on the legal system to be able to take these actions, like, for example, move the court to him to be able to get a ruling out of the scenario?
I think we've already beyond that point. I think the public is sick and tired of the whole thing, and I think they are feeling, listen, this guy is wasting our time, he's wasting our money. I was part of the investigation into the whole Nkandla thing, 265 million spent on a person's private house, taxpayers' money. It's absolutely unacceptable. I think people are way beyond the point that they want to tolerate this behavior, and we should take the necessary steps and have the court case go ahead in any case.
Because there is a kind of scenario, bringing it back, full circle to our discussion at the start. It really is a scenario of credibility, in the scenario of if the South African legal system cannot be pointed to appropriately addressing corruption in the legal process and having Mr. Zuma stand before and the ruling being given whether he's innocent or guilty. If that situation can't be happening, then there can't be placed trust in the way that money is managed in South Africa. Therefore, the economy will suffer under it. So do you feel like the actions here should be taken not from the interest of perhaps finding, justice or the scenario around it, but rather from South Africans' perspectives that they want jobs, they want a better economic environment?
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. One of the basic things in any state for a successful state is an effective operational legal system where people can trust the legal system. They know there will be justice. As long as this thing is not sorted out, people say, but there's no justice. And people will then also say, but why should we keep to the law? Why should we continue paying our taxes? Why should we respect the police and whatever the case may be? And the state will crumble even further. You cannot allow one person, for whoever that may be, to undermine the legal process, and the necessary steps need to be taken. It's never acceptable. Can't be.
So in this scenario, I want to end off with, I want to ask you, the common person in South Africa that's getting frustrated about this, that reads News 24, that has a scenario that's happening, what are the channels that you would most recommend them for allowing this type of situation to be dealt with more swiftly to benefit all of South Africa? Is it their constituents that they should contact, and which are the portals in which they can most easily be able to do this?
I think what we need to do is a combined approach. Us, from the political party side, should put this on the table within the parliamentary processes on different levels, put some pressure on the Minister of Justice, put some pressure on the President, on the prosecuting authority, but civil society should also play a role. At the moment, it's difficult because of the COVID regulations. But citizens should also play a role and put the necessary pressure on the prosecuting authority and on the courts. We don't want to act unlawfully. But we can never condone this and say, okay, well, for this or that or the other reason, we should not go ahead. We can't do that.
As a last parting comment, would you feel that one of South Africa's biggest problems is actually its apathy in the way that South Africans are dealing with a lot of these scenarios? We have such a wonderful capacity as South Africans to be able to laugh about hardships in a way that we actually find that as a point of pride, that we're able to laugh about this and come together as a community as stuff that's difficult. But this also at the same time generates a bit of apathy. Is that something that frustrates you, or do you feel like we should keep this positive spirit always?
Well, the positive spirit is good, and we should also see the bright side, and the humor is good. But we've been tolerating things in this country that will not be tolerated anywhere else. And we need to move away from that. And how do we do that? No one should be as interested in our future or your future as the people should be themselves in terms of taking charge of their future. We are paying taxes. People are suffering to make it ends meet. But we've got a government that is absolutely just going on as if it's a spending spree in terms of corruption. People should wake up and take responsibility. And if people feel that they don't want to get involved, at least get yourself registered and go to the polls and vote other people into power, that we can have a government that will look after what needs to be done.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mulder. I've really, really appreciated this conversation. I just want to give you a last opportunity if you want to add anything or say anything to the people, the viewers.
Sure. No, from my perspective, when I speak to people, and quite often in interviews, I tell them, I'm not a European. I'm an African. If I have to speak in racial terms, I'm a white African. My family came to Africa in 1685. I've got no other home. I've got no other continent. I'm part of Africa. And I've just as much right to be here as anybody else in Africa. I'm not going to allow anyone to push me out. I'm not going to allow anybody to push my family or my people out of Africa. We've got a future here. We're going to stay here. We've got wonderful opportunity. There are wonderful, positive people across racial lines and across groups in South Africa. And we can create a wonderful, prosperous future. But then people must take responsibility for their own future. We must get rid of corruption. We must get rid of the ANC as a government, and we must develop, and we can do that in a very exciting and a prosperous manner. I'm optimistic. I've got 4 children. I've got 2 grandchildren. I'm going to stay here. We're going to have a wonderful future. And it's luckily not for the ANC to decide what my future or the people that we support, their future will be like. So I'm very excited. I'm optimistic. And tomorrow will be another day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that message. I really, really appreciate it. To our viewers, if you've made it this far and you acknowledge or agree with the perspective, or just want to share the message for other people to perhaps view this perspective, please by all means share Dr. Mulder's message to everybody around you. It obviously, of course, helps us as a YouTube channel as well. We're a business I'm running here, but in terms of getting the message out there, getting the discussion going, getting the important things happening, please by all means support Dr. Mulder and the message in that way. So thank you so much. We'll put all of the links in the description that are applicable that we've talked about in this discussion in the description below for people to follow if they want to take action. Otherwise, like Dr. Mulder said, take charge of your own life. Get registered, go and vote, and make sure that you're part of the future. Make sure you're part of the future that you want to be part of. So thank you so much, Dr. Mulder. This has been WorldView.